Hello, welcome to PodRocket. I'm Kate, the producer of PodRocket. With me today is Michael Chan, formerly known as Chantastic on Twitter and Discord. Michael, how's it going?
It's going great. So happy to be here again.
Thanks for joining us again. You were on back in November, and we talked about the React podcast.
And we talked about like community and Discord and like all the cool stuff happening there. Yeah, that was fun. That was a lot of fun. I had fun that day.
Yeah. But now we're going to be talking about Storybook and Chromatic. We can also talk about community and all the fun stuff too. But yeah, maybe just to start, kind of tell us about your role and kind of what you've been working on lately.
Yeah, so in September, I guess like just a little bit before I came on that PodRocket episode, I joined the team at Chromatic. Chromatic is a company is the company who maintains and builds Storybook. And I joined, and I think technically my role is something like DX community engineer. Honestly, I don't remember. What that means, I guess, in the abstract is that I help people understand how to utilize and use Storybook. And mostly my part of that is doing that through media. So I have a show on the Storybook YouTube channel called Storytime with Chantastic, where I just interview people who know a lot more about me in terms of design systems, front-end engineering, kind of like what's happening in that space, and ask them like what we should know about building design systems, both like, Storybook, Chromatic, and then as an industry, like what we can learn from the stuff that's happening inside of the space, inside frameworks, all that kind of stuff. So tons of really cool interviews over there. Like if anyone is interested more in this stuff, that show's fun. We have, I think, like 3 episodes now, and it's just like a monthly interview. Super cool, super fun. But yeah, that's mostly what I do, building up some egghead courses to, again, like help engineers understand the value of Storybook as a testing tool. And yeah, that's effectively what I'm doing these days. I guess that's, one definition of what a DX community engineer means.
Nice. Yes. Do you find that your role as a DX community engineer, do you think that's specific to kind of Chromatic's situation where, like, maintaining this open source tool, like Storybook's open source, right? Yeah. So do you think is your role kind of intrinsically tied to that, or do you think could you see similar roles to your own, like a more traditional proprietary software company?
Yeah, that's interesting. So there has been some spontaneous evolution at other companies. So a good friend of mine, Demetrius Clark, over at Netlify now, also joined the Netlify team as I think like similar if not identical title of like DX community engineer, which we had like a pretty good laugh over that because neither of us understood what it meant, but we both got jobs like with that thing. And I think it kind of maybe means like, we don't know what you do, but we want you to keep doing it here, which is, I don't know, maybe a good place to be. It's like what is it? Like almost that like entrepreneur kind of like mindset. Like, okay, so you understand like media and community and, just keeping people like happy and interested. And at one point you programmed, so like this is your bucket now. But yeah, I kind of like it. Like I kind of like ambiguous spaces as I'm learning. Like I like staring into the fog and then trying to like put shapes together and like figure out what's on the other side. So I don't know. I'm into it.
Yeah. I guess what led me to my question is I feel like that's kind of, a pillar of open source in general, right? It's like, oh, well, we'll have like this organic community built around it. Like the thing will advertise itself and we'll have like involvement with all these people and everything will be very transparent. So like, do you think about that a lot in this role? You're like figuring out, like trying to discern those shapes in the fog. Does Storybook being open source like kind of help you in that regard? Or do you have to keep that in mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Chromatic has a really fun DX team right now. Chromatic is not a big company. I think as of this episode, we're at about like 24 people, and like just a few weeks ago, it was like 18. So super small company doing a lot of stuff. 5 of us are on the DX team, and it's been really fun because everyone on that team has a different specialty, whether it be like, documentation or a community organization or kind of like big product releases that kind of like garner interest in the Storybook ecosystem. And so it's been really fun to see everybody specialize. And because it's a small team, we kind of like go out as far on our interests as possible. And yeah, I think that I'm less involved in that piece of it, but I think that there is this really interesting separation in a lot of these startups today, where it's like you have the open source part of it, which kind of belongs exclusively to the community, and then you have like the business side of it, which supports the open source stuff, but maybe it's less exciting to the general population that there's this service that you pay money for and like does a thing than the thing that's free and you can install and unlock some new capability in your application. And it's a really interesting. I've never been close to like startup culture at all before this, and so it is really interesting to see that thing that you're talking about, the like kind of open source marketing funnel for like a service that businesses actually take part of. It's like really interesting because it's like B2B, but then there's this like kind of like human layer in the middle where like the developers are actually making the decision, and so like you have to meet the developers like where they're at by being a developer who like talks about the open source stuff. It's truly fascinating, this kind of like judo kind of thing where it's like we can't just like be B2B because like engineers hate having used tools that were just mandated from the top down. So we have to like kind of catch them on the engineering side and then like have those decisions like filter up through the company.
Yeah, so like we kind of feel that energy here as well as LogRocket, like always going for the human element of engineering, right? But it is like a B2B product kind of at its core. But yeah, I was curious about like that kind of having that open source angle there. I feel like that tugs at the heartstrings of a lot of devs just inherently, right? People are excited about it.
Yeah, and I think it challenges us too, right? Because something that's happening right now is that like technically is that Vite as a like ES module builder is taking off in mindshare right now. In terms of like what companies actually use to deliver software right now, like the vast majority of it, if you're building a front end app, is Webpack. But there's so much excitement and hype over like Vite, like that's the next thing, that's the next thing that's gonna like come up. But like that's very like engineering led, and so it's really cool because like we get to kind of see those things, try to adapt to them, and build a better product that's a little bit more agnostic of some of those tools. And I think that's the thing that's really fun about open source is that you can find a lot of people who are really excited about helping you with that. So you don't have to be an expert. Like none of us are experts in this new tool yet, but we can actually like utilize like other people's excitement to kind of like help other people in the community. And that's one thing I really love about open source in general. And like any part of your platform that you can open source is great because you can, even if you don't take open source contributions, being able to just share what you're working on to someone else who like is not in your company and doesn't have authorization to your GitHub repos and all that stuff is just makes the conversation so much easier. And I feel like it's almost always helpful on both ends. People seeing legitimate problems in real production apps, and then also people helping out with knowledge that they have. And I don't know, it's a very virtuous kind of fun thing right now, and I like that. I like this collaborative space we're in.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like something about like the development tool chain in particular is always just like people are excited about it. Like back to your Vite example, it's like everyone wants to use the hot new thing. Like everybody's like they install it once, they do it, and it's like, oh, this is amazing. Like this blows Webpack away. I'm going to be 50% more productive now. But then you got to like, okay, now how do I get my giant company's tool chain all switched over? We've got to commit like 160 hours of resources to getting any like the first project switched over. How do we even begin? So that's an interesting dichotomy for sure. I guess maybe to take a step back and frame everything a little bit more.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Storybook more specifically. For those that aren't familiar, like what is Storybook? How does it compare to other tools in its space? And what is it trying to do?
I'm so glad that you asked. It's Storybook is so many things, and we're actually just kind of unlocking a handful of features that I think would change what it means to people. And I know that sounds super abstract, so I'm gonna kind of dive into that. Effectively, Storybook, as my friend Brad Frost describes it, is a front end workshop environment, and he's had this term kind of indifferent to Storybook, but I really like it because the notion is that you have a space that you can work on front end components, front end UI, all that kind of stuff that's completely dedicated to you as a front end engineer. And I think we've all had that experience in monolithic applications. So I came from a Rails background. In a monolithic app, you have to run the entire, you're building front ends through the entire application stack effectively. And there are a handful of things that are really irritating about that. Specifically, if I want to test this UI for a certain user type with a certain authorization, I have to actually go into the database, fiddle around with some settings, or have have fixtures for all of the permutations of various users that I might have in my application. And there's a lot of fiddling that goes on, and then maybe I edit my profile inside of a modal, and so I have to change the database, and then I have to go and I have to navigate to my profile. I click the button that enacts the modal, and then I do the thing that I wanted to do. There's always a lot of steps that we have as front end engineers, and it always sucks. And that's effectively the problem that Storybook is trying to solve, is having a dedicated front end workspace. It says, hey, now that we have this component model, and a lot of things are driven by props, the data that somebody sees is driven by props, the parts of the UI that they see based on their authorization is driven by props, the end state of the modal itself, whether it's an error page or the actual page that you're supposed to see or a loading screen, often driven by props. So how can we separate what we test, the things that we want to see, the permutations of this component, indifferent to the way the database is set up or the connections and whatnot? And that's a really powerful thing with components, because a lot of this is just data in and then it renders a thing. And now that we have this really isolated way of showing complex UIs, I think the tools that have existed in the past aren't very good at this particular space. And so I think that the beauty of something like Storybook is having a place that's kind of isolated from your development environment. So you don't have to test things through your development environment. It's just hey, with these props, what do you look like, right? In this set, with this mock data, what do you look like? With this mock user, what do you look like? In this network state, what do you look like? And it's all driven by props instead of having to kind of fake all of the environment around you just to see certain things. So that's kind of the value of Storybook. I think that it is living in a space where just unit testing drops off, and before end-to-end testing like Cypress begins, giving us an environment where we can kind of stress test components from a visual browser specific interest. And yeah, I absolutely love it.
Nice.
But yeah.
Are people mainly using it? I guess I'm sure there's a whole variety of use cases, but are most people using it kind of in the design process as they're building components, or maybe implementing what a designer has handed off, or is it in the testing stack primarily, where people are finding value?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, and I think that every company handles it a little bit differently. Up to this point, Storybook's been extremely popular with the subset of people who are doing component libraries that are an artifact of a broader design system. So when you look at companies big companies that have dedicated design system departments, I think that is who Storybook has resonated with the most, because there's a really close mapping. Like when you look at a storybook and you look at maybe storyboards that exist inside of something like Figma, there's a really close mapping where it's kind of like you're seeing all the various permutations in a visual state, and now you're bringing that over to like a codified version of that, where these now exist in code. They have different like things that you can manipulate to see like, oh, what does this look like with a long name or a short name, or emoji as a name. And it's something that you can actually manipulate and maintain like in a versioned way from a code perspective. And yeah, and that's it. It always sucks to have like representation in two places, but we definitely haven't arrived at that place where it's like, oh, like design and development are a single process now. And as much as I'd like it to be, I think it's been something that I've wanted since the days of like front page in the mid 90s, when I started like front end development. And I don't know, I'm not sure it's ever going to happen at this point.
Yeah, it's hard to know. It's hard to know what that'll look like in however many, or it's hard to have that long a view, I guess. I mean, I feel like it's getting better, right? Like it's getting better.
It is.
We get better results out of Figma now than like we did before out of some other tools.
For
where
sure.
Just like people were like giving things and we had an image and it's like, okay, go dev, figure
Yes.
this out now. Like it's better than that world.
It is, yeah. And I have absolutely loved Figma. Figma is the design, like kind of design developer handoff tool that I've always wanted. Like the fact that you can just like inspect stuff really easily, and like there's a notion, there's a component notion there as well, makes it really easy to kind of connect these things to props or whatever your framework of choice uses for that. There's a natural connection, and I love that logically we're landing on some similar primitives, because it makes it a lot easier to talk about, even if that handoff isn't like one-to-one.
Yeah, totally. Do you ever see, I mean, this is like a very broad question, but do you think it makes, I don't know the correct way to frame this, I guess, but does it seem like it'd be feasible for something like Storybook to start reaching into that space further? Because like, well, we've already got kind of like the dev side here. We can go everything from like props to rendering to like running tests on it. Does it feel like a tool that designers would ever be using, or like is there interest in that?
Yeah. So I know right now there's a lot of interest on Teams.
Mm-hmm.
And a big part of my job right now is to try and figure out how we can communicate better to developers. Because I think there's so many great tools inside of Storybook that would help with every UI component, on NPM.
Right.
And so like I want to try to get more into that like open source, like developer type of workflow mindset. The designer thing is a little bit more challenging, because I think that there's always going to be some type of tool that's better suited for that UI manipulation part of things. And Figma is really great at this, right? I feel like, and I think one of the reasons that has resonated so much with the web community is because of its overlap with web concepts, so it's like even like auto layout, like you can squint and see that that's like a flex box or like a flex container, right? And like you know how to manipulate. When you see an auto layout, you're like, oh, okay, like I know how to like actually like codify this up. And I think that there's something like really beautiful about that. Whether or not like I've looked at so many things that actually like take that and put that into code, and I think unfortunately there's just always going to be a growing number of concerns that can't easily be represented in a UI tool like Figma. I think specifically like accessibility. It's something that we're all learning and like getting better at, but it's very much a page by page, component by component kind of thing. And I'm not sure how you would abstract that in something like a Figma that without just making Figma like also a code editor.
Right. Yeah, beyond just like the CSS and stuff that you're doing there already.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Like in terms of the interface of a component, I'm just not sure that like even if you could provide that, like I would be weary of that actually committing code in a way that is going to maintain the flexibility that is required from front-end developers to actually construct a page that's accessible to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a super tricky problem for sure. So I guess with that in mind, what process have you found works the best, kind of in your experience, when you're spinning up a new user interface or a team is going out to spin up a new user interface? Like, do you start by like trying to think of like the small components, like this is what we're going to have buttons look like, or do you start big and work your way down, or do you start small and work your way out?
That's such a great question too. I love that. Yeah. So we have this concept of component-driven design, and we may talk about that a little bit more. But up to this point, that concept has been really like addressed to teams who have some kind of like component library design system, like team. So like big companies, basically. But I mean, as engineers, that's not really the way that we work typically. Like if I'm going to go make a new page, I'm going to make a new app, I'm going to make a new, I don't know, whatever. I usually start from the biggest thing and then just kind of like chisel it out, like get it working, right? I don't even like one component. I like make one file and like this is the new page or like whatever, and then go from there. And I hope that over the next like handful of months this year, 2022, that we develop a better story for that. So I think you'd mentioned that kind of like outside in, big to small, small to big kind of thing, and we're starting to think about it a little bit more in terms of the complexity that you need to represent. Because I think there's something really interesting about the kind of progressive nature of building a full page and then shipping that, and then kind of looking over it and thinking, okay, what can and should be pulled out of this, whether that's to be shared or if it's just to document the full complexity of the thing that represents. Because you can have, I mean, it's amazing, like just the reality of posting someone's name to the screen has so much complexity to it, whether it's a long name and if that breaks layout, or if it's a short name, or like I said earlier, like maybe they just put a single emoji. Maybe it's non-Latin characters, or you have to support right to left. There's so much complexity that you need to be able to like visualize and test in a way that's like repeatable, revisitable, that has nothing to do with the idea of sharing that component, right? Like, yeah, sure, like sharing it's great, but like also testing it in isolation allows us to create a catalog of the things that we know that we support, and be able to like revisit that when like new criteria come and we realize, oh, like we had a lossy picture of what this thing is. And so yes, from that like kind of like I guess that would be more like a top down or like outside in approach. I don't think that we've talked about it enough, but I really do hope that we can get better about talking about that, because I think that that's where a lot of like developers, entrepreneurs, indie hackers, where they live, not that whole like, yeah, let's spend a year and millions of dollars building a design system that's designed for perfect reuse and shareability so that everyone doesn't have to worry about making these tiny little components. That is a big company problem. And right. We see Storybook as like, if you have components, you should be able to use Storybook and be better off for it.
Gotcha. So like are people using, I guess, these smaller companies then that have already decided, we're going to use some existing design system or component library or whatever, right? Like we're going to have someone else that's got time and energy to figure all these like hard problems out that we're just like, we're trying to build functionality. We want it to look good, but we don't have the resources to do it. Are there companies doing that with Storybook where they're, using some component library that's doing a lot of that legwork for them, but then kind of having Storybook help bridge the gap of like, well, now we're in UX territory, right? Like, our app has to be usable, but we are not doing like super low level stuff here.
Yeah. So if I understand the question correctly, I do. Yeah, we're developing an answer for that. So there's two things that are actually really cool right now. Just a couple months ago, we released a component encyclopedia. So it was a friend on the DX team, Kyle Gatch, and a bunch of people on the engineering staff. That created an encyclopedia of a handful of, I mean, you can go, it's on the storybook.js.org site. And so there's this really cool encyclopedia that shows a lot of public storybooks that people have created. So things from Shopify and Audi and GitHub and all that kind of stuff. And so there's that. We don't have a lot of stuff up there yet. Like we're continually adding to include more things. Like I think things that would be more beneficial to indie developers would be a storybook for like Chakra UI or MUI and showing those, because I think those are things that people kind of pull off the shelf and say like, okay, I'm going to make an app and I'm going to use this thing. If you do decide to do that, and there's a storybook available for the framework that you choose, we have this really awesome feature. It's one of my favorite things, and most people don't know about it. It's called Storybook Composition, and it's a way to have in your sidebar full storybook libraries added to your thing. So you could have so you have your storybook and all the stories that you're doing for your pages and your components and all that kind of stuff. But then you can also include the like Chakra UI storybook inside of there with all of its documentation, etc., pinned to the specific version that you use. And now that's part of your documentation as a small team. It's one of my favorite features. It's super cool. I think it's also handy even for big companies where you have like a core UI library, but then this team focuses on like the ads UI, and this team focuses on whatever, because now each team can have their own storybook and just include the version documentation for the core UI library that they're using. But yeah, I think that again, something that we're getting a story that we're getting better at telling. But yeah, I think that there is a lot of there's a lot of cool things that you can do if you want to just pull off one of those UI libraries right off the shelf, which I think is a really good idea if you're starting or have like a small company, and then not even think about the design system thing at all, except for your more composed views like pages and modals and components that actually apply to like your specific domain.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I just feel like kind of riffing off what you said before, of like displaying a username is hard. Like there are such tricky problems out there that most little shops do not have time to like get super in the weeds on a design system. I think a little bit ago you mentioned component driven development. Can you talk about that a little more? What does that mean?
Yeah, so the way I see component driven development is again like on that continuum of testing things that someone needs to a front end engineer needs to concern themselves with. On one side you have something like unit tests, which are going to just like test like with these inputs I get these outputs. Now that falls short somewhere on the UI side. So like if you think about Jest, I know that there's like a concept of snapshotting things in Jest where you can render a component and it's going to show you the output to the browser. So effectively the markup, I guess, which isn't particularly useful. I mean, I guess it is kind of useful as a backstop to be like, oh, this component didn't render at all, or it rendered markedly different from like what we expected before. But in terms of like whether or not that actually is going to render in a browser or render in one of your target browsers, it's like, who knows? So there's this big cliff right there. And up to this point, it's really just been like, I guess from the other end is like end-to-end testing, where you have to test your whole application. Before every test, you have to set up a whole like login routine for various user types and authorizations and whatever. And then like once they're logged in, then you can run various states and whatnot. And I find those tests like really painful and brittle to write, but like absolutely necessary. But for me, it's like, if I'm going to write them at all, it's basically, can any user log in? Can they pay me money? And like maybe basic CRUD operations on like the major like domain of the app. So if you're like a to-do list app, can I create, edit, and delete a to-do? But like after that, it's like, I'm done.
Right. Like, yeah. You can come up with infinite permutations. It's just like, well, the 5 things are done. Like, I don't know. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so like I think that those are kind of like the extremes of our testing. And what we think is sitting in the middle is this idea of component driven testing, which is, hey, you have the components, you're testing them as a developer through the browser. And so we want to give you tools that allow you to do that job more effectively. So instead of creating a UI and then grabbing the corner of the browser and then like moving it back and forth to see if if your site is responsive in the ways that you expect. Like we'll give you a tool for actually representing that UI with various breakpoints that you support. And so you can see the whole thing like up front every time. So you make a change, you see it across all of them. Like cool. Um, being able to do things like that feels like we don't have a good domain for that, right? Like I don't even know how I would like. I know it's possible to do an end-to-end testing, but as you said, there's so many permutations. Like I don't want to write a test for all of those things, and then I don't want to do it manually either, right? Like having to turn the network off in my Chrome DevTools to test that this modal shows a 404 or like a 500 or whatever. I guess it wouldn't be either of those. Some type of error that isn't either of those errors.
Yeah. Whatever. However you expect your app to break. Yeah.
Yeah. However I expect my app to break, I can create things for that I can see all the time, right? Instead of having to kind of like poke and prod and pry at my UI. And I really like that. I think it's a really interesting space where you can capture a lot of complexity using a browser without having to have a full command over that browser. And then also not assuming that other people are going to be able to or capable of running through that entire gauntlet every time they add a feature. Being able to create stories for those and just to be able to look at it and be like, oh yeah, no, we have considered the 400, the 404 versus the 500 versus the never ends up loading states. And I think that is a really powerful thing that we're really just at the beginning of. I think that we, as UI front end engineers, use fairly primitive tools at this point, and so we're trying to just kind of elevate the repeatability of our pawing and poking and prodding.
Right. So just to help me close the loop a little bit mentally. So
Yeah.
Before you were saying like you'd make a tweak to your list component or something, and then you got to like the old school way to like you grab your browser corner and like try it in all these heights and widths and try to make sure everything works. How specifically is this kind of this way of thinking and using tooling like Storybook? How does it help me not have to do that?
Yeah. So what you can do is a big part of the idea is that one of the beauties of components is that there's a lot of complexity inside them, but the interface for that is props. And so with the component, we have this way of kind of creating or like, I don't want to say forcing, but like artificially creating an environment that doesn't necessarily have to be recreated, right? Because the interface is just props. Like we don't need a component that knows that we're using Redux and that Redux store goes, and fetches information from this API in this way. We can just say like, this is your information. And Storybook allows us to create a story for an indefinite amount of states. So instead of thinking about things in terms of like all of the connective tissue, we're just like, hey, we know that like an authorized user would see it this way. We're just going to give it the data for this, like if they got this request, and so that we can see this. And we're going to like, because it's so important that we see it in these various kind of like widths or whatever, we're going to make stories for those as well, where we see it at the like mobile width, the middle width, and the big width. And so like the more stories you make, the more you have this kind of lens outside of time, I guess. And one of the ways that I think about like component driven development as being different from some of these other type of testing tools is there's been a lot of talk, like in the Marvel universe in particular, about like multiverse, right? And so, like, with Spider-Man and the what is it, Doctor Strange, and like all that overlap that's happening right now. There's a lot of this idea of these things that are just kind of true in parallel, I guess, right? They're like fractured realities. And when I think about Storybook, I think about it as a tool for capturing some of those fractured realities. So I can see like multiple dimensions of a thing. So I can see what, the Miles Morales profile looks like on mobile, like with all of Miles Morales's permissions. But then I can see also like what, Peter B. Parker, that profile looks like at desktop size with all of their permissions. And it's like it's kind of fun when you like think about it like from this perspective of, almost like a Minority Report type of thing, where you just kind of like see like the full picture of everything, indifferent to kind of what state something is in. And it unlocks for me like just a different way of thinking of like, oh, okay, like if there's a possible UI state, I can add it to Storybook and then capture that as a concern for myself in the future and every other developer on my team, which I think hasn't been the case up to this point, right? Because it's like I might do a really thorough job of making sure that my components are tested for all the various breakpoints and all the different authorizations and user types and all that kind of stuff. But like that, there's no guarantee that someone else does the same thing. And like maybe I like go into Notion and I'm like, hey, if you really want to be thorough about updating this UI, like here are the 170 criteria that it needs to pass in order for
right.
But instead we just have it visually. It's just like, here, this is everything that we know. And like maybe that's a lossy picture of the universe, but if it is, then when we discover a new thing, we're just gonna like, we discover a new Peter Parker, a new Spider-Man, like we just kind of add them to this gauntlet and then let the machines kind of tell us whether or not we did it correctly.
Yeah, nice. So I guess I'm not a Storybook user, but what currently? I keep hearing more, and I like all these people are grabbing it, and I'm like, man, maybe I should be checking this out for like even personal projects. Like this sounds great. But I guess so. How do I if I add a story for something, like what is the pass criteria usually look like? Like what is valid? How do I know when I add a new, Miles Morales, and it's like, okay, that works in this state? Like what does that look like?
Oh, all the things that I love talking about. Thank you for asking these. So one thing that's really interesting about UI, and I think another way in which Storybook differentiates itself from the other testing tools, in UI, you are allowed soft exceptions. So if I run a unit test suite, there's no concept of like a soft exception, right? Like it passes as a whole or it fails as a whole, right? And I don't want to merge, like I'm never going to merge something that fails. And so what's interesting about UI though is that we accept a lossy view of what is accurate, I guess, right? So even the name thing, like, your first iteration of this component that renders a name maybe does like some kind of juncture of like first and last name. And then you realize like, well, that's a very like Western concept. And so we have to have a more complex idea of how to handle these fields and represent them, given, demographics and regions and whatnot. Almost lost I definitely lost my train of thought.
No, that's okay. Yeah, but like what passing criteria? Like
passing criteria.
Yeah.
So in a lot of cases, like with components, like you could then, without actually adding any code, like just put a failing case up there. So you can add a story for like, hey, this is what this looks like now, and it shouldn't look like that. But we want to put it in there for like when we eventually fix the code and this snaps into place and becomes correct. So there's this idea of like soft exceptions in UI, which I really like, and I think that it's a big differentiator between the kind of end-to-end and unit testing tools. So we have that as something that we need to consider. Storybook itself doesn't have a like kind of like passing or failing criteria, and so that's where Chromatic comes in. With Chromatic, you can connect to a storybook. It knows everything about your storybook, and it will take snapshots of visual snapshots of everything you tested, or every UI permutation that you have a story for. It'll make snapshots for all of those that you have, and it will do a visual diff, and then I think also like a code snapshot diff of the, assuming that you're on Git or whatnot, it'll do a visual diff of the kind of proposed change versus the last like baseline snapshot that you have accepted. And so as you make changes, like so additions are always, additions, you're always going to like, accept, right? But you're going to have these warnings as well saying like, oh, hey, you changed this code over here, but then this, permutation of this code in this, in desktop orientation, well, now it looks a little bit different. And you can go through, look at it and say like, oh yeah, actually that's what I want, update the baseline. And then, once that's good, we have a integration with GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, that you'll now see that PR check goes green and you can merge it. But yeah, so that's kind of the criteria right now. You could accept it in like a kind of like a known exceptional state, if you wanted to, and then kind of see that it fell into place later on when you update it. But yeah, that's kind of like the 1-2 punch of Storybook and Chromatic. Storybook's the place where you like author all of your stories, and then Chromatic is that CI check that does all of the automatic checking for you. It does automated checking across multiple browsers if you want. So yeah, really cool stuff. Which honestly, that was the unlock for me. Like I was just like you. I was like, it's like, yeah, Storybook, like it's fine. Like whatever, that's cool. I can like, but I mean, I can also just like put a page and like render components like on it, like no big deal, and it's probably be faster that way. But when I started getting into browser testing, like specifically, and having to make sure that every component that we built continued to work across all of the browsers, I was like, I am not long for this world if I have to do this every day of my life. And so I just, that was the day I installed Chromatic and just let the machines do it. I was just like, I just need to know that they look the same as the last time that I checked them. And if they do, like that's good enough for me.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like, yeah, again, I'm making it sound like I haven't, been convinced sufficiently yet. But yeah, like we are users here at LogRocket and stuff. I just like
Nice.
I haven't had the opportunity to touch the front end component since we like started into that path. I'm kind of in an isolated role right now.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And I hope that it doesn't come off as defensive either. Like, cause I was seriously the same boat. I was like, yeah, like that's cute, right? It's cute that you have a dedicated space where you can like look at your components. Like that's cute. But man, when it came to like time for a thing that I absolutely did not want to do ever again in my entire life, I was like, I'm sold. Like, sign me up.
Yeah, I think even without the CI/CD component there and like that first layer of automated checking, like is there any visual diff at all? I just feel like having the tooling in place to make it so even like a manual visual check is like easier and faster to perform is like hugely beneficial. Just in like, you don't have to have an army of QA that are just like going through these motions every time and like testing all these things. Like, well, no, like here it's like that work is kind of done for you already. Like just go like, does this all look right? That is huge in and of itself.
And to that QA thing as well, like I don't want anyone at any part of the component development product lifecycle to have to repeatedly do something every single time. Right? Like what a huge waste of effort, right? Like I would love, for that specialty to like be able to figure out new ways in which our application breaks instead of just testing the like 500 ways we know that it could possibly break. And so that's one thing that I feel like that is a really great tie-in, because now you can take those failures and and now incorporate them into your like test suite. Even if they're like soft, like, oh, hey, we actually have a lot of people asking about this type of support of names. Can we put some condition, or not conditions, can we put some like cases in there so that we can see what it looks like now, but then know that it changed when it changed. And I think it just makes like a more integrated kind of like feature lifecycle across the board, which I like. I mean, I don't think that, like, if there's something that we know enough that it's just like a process that someone has to do the same way every time, like we should just have a robot do that. Like, that's what robots are for.
Yeah, totally. Have you found like QA teams to be Storybook users? Is that like a demographic you guys kind of target at all?
That's a good question. We, I don't know. I know that a lot of, like, at my last job, there was an overlap of, QA, and then some of the, like, I can't even remember there's a tool for kind of like browser testing, and you can actually like record scripts and whatnot.
I've used a couple of them. They're
Yeah,
out there. There's so many. Yeah.
one of those. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I haven't actually heard a lot with Storybook, but again, we have up to this point focused mostly on like design systems teams.
Gotcha.
And so I think that as we focus more into communicating for engineers and feature work, I think that we'll naturally have a little bit more kind of inclusion in the development feature product space.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. I guess you mentioned a little bit briefly, like the kind of having that first CI/CD check of like image diffing and stuff that Chromatic can kind of supercharge Storybook with. Is there anything else cool that Chromatic is doing currently that's exciting or on the horizon that kind of?
Yeah, so I think Chromatic is a lot of things. So the visual regression testing and across browsers and the code diffing or the output diffing is all stuff that you get access to, and it's super great. But it's actually kind of built out as a collaboration platform, and so it's really nice to have a place where people can communicate without having to go to the GitHub issue. So that's something that I've noticed on a lot of my teams is, engineering has this full conversation on the GitHub issue, and how do kind of strict designers or stakeholders or managers like speak into that process when really the thing that they're reviewing is more of a visual thing. And so Chromatic solves that problem as well, giving people a place to have that conversation, kind of drop pins and say like, hey, is this what we expected for this thing? Have those conversations in a way that ties into CI, but in a way that person never has to actually like log into GitHub and talk about an issue in reviewing code.
Gotcha. Cool.
So yeah, that part is really cool and a huge kind of benefit once you start integrating that into your life cycle.
Nice. I guess, yeah. Anything else, like on a more personal level you're excited about coming up? Anything you want to plug?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a good question. I think honestly, so I'd mentioned at the top of the show, but something I'm doing right now is with Storybook is Storytime with Chantastic. It's on the Storybook YouTube page, so youtube.com/storybookjs or /c/storybookjs, however you get to channels. And that's been super fun. I really enjoyed talking with people. I got to talk with Brad Frost. That was the first episode. We talked about the front end workshop environment in the abstract. Super cool. Talked with Ryan Behan at Shopify and how to manage design system designer handoffs. Talked with Tom Prestonwerner recently, co-founder of GitHub, and so many other things about their new framework, Redwood.js, and how it, by default, out of the box, will generate Storybook for your components. And they have this model, like for anybody interested, they have this model called a cell, and they use Storybook to document the error loading and like loaded states for you for this concept right out of the box. So generator, it works like right off the bat. All the data is mocked through like, they have like a Prisma like ORM for their various backends, and like all the data gets mocked based on the Prisma schema. It's like freaking rad. Like this is the dream state of like Storybook front end web development, like feature development integration. Like totally check it out. Even if you're not a Redwood user, like it's really interesting inspiration. And then, yeah, personally, I don't know. I'm kind of I'm kind of figuring out what's next for me on the personal front. I am doing a lot in community. So we have a Discord community, discord.gg/lunchdev, where I hang out a lot, just getting to know a lot of people doing cool stuff in the front end space. And
it's where like a lot of our guests come from on the podcast.
yeah, huge amount of crossover there, which is really fun. And then, yeah, I'm working on doing some more YouTube stuff on content creation for software engineers, which is kind of a funny intersection, but it's like where I live right now. So yeah, that's youtube.com/Chantastic. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, if you want to learn how to edit or use a camera or like how to make microphones work, like all that kind of stuff. So super fun. And yeah, that's me.
Nice. Yeah, your lighting looks great right now. I was going to ask. Like, you're killing it. Yeah, if you needed a plug, it looks so good. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michael. We appreciate it, and we will certainly see you around.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.